Good morning. Welcome to United First Parish Church. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your journey, welcome to our Unitarian Universalist spiritual community. I'm the Reverend Rebecca Froom. Our worship leaders this morning on screen and behind screen are our Director of Religious Education, Joan McDonald, our Music Director, Norman Corey, and our Digital Usher, Fiona Sankey. You can download our order of service this morning from our website, www.ufpc.org. We'll also be pasting hymn lyrics in the chat as we go along. For our online worship services, we invite you to go ahead and leave your video on so that we might see one another in gallery view, even though we are physically apart. That said, Zoom fatigue is very real, so if you will be most present this morning by turning your video off, go ahead and do that. Note that we are recording this morning's service to be posted on YouTube at a later date. Also note that this morning we are having the chat disabled, so you can speak with Fiona, Joan, and I on the chat, but not publicly. It has come to our attention that liberal congregations may be targeted this morning with hate speech in the form of Zoom bombing. And our worship committee, Fiona, Joan, and I have been thinking about how to prepare for that and protect one another from that. And so for today, one of the ways is to have the chat off for most of our time. Thank you for your understanding and participation in helping create a safer community. We do invite everyone to stay following the service for our virtual social hour. And guests in particular, we invite you to stay and get to know us a little bit more. And now let us center ourselves for worship by taking a deep breath, feeling that spirit of life, that spirit of love that is there to ground and guide us. Let us open our hearts for a call to worship by the great author, Anonymous. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Come, let us worship. As we prepare to light our chalice, symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith, we encourage you to kindle the flame in your own home if you have a candle or a chalice nearby.
Our chalice lighting words today come from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a letter from a Birmingham jail. This was written April 16th, 1963. I wish you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, with the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to one who inquired about her weariness. My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. They will be the young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders, courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience's sake. One day, the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I light our chalice inspired by these words. Please join us in sharing our covenant, which is in your screen and also in the chat. As a free fellowship of this historic church, we unite to lift our hearts and open our minds to a larger reality, to accept, support, and encourage one another, to seek the wisdom in all religions, to cherish and sustain the web of life, and to strive for justice, compassion, and peace. If there are any children in the Zoom, we invite you to come a little closer and listen to this song titled Be a Pain.
If you see something that's wrong, raise your hand and say that's wrong. Point it out and name that thing by its name. Don't stand by and stare. If it's wrong, it's your affair. Don't be quiet, make a riot. Be a pain. Be a pain, be a pain. Shout about it and complain. Ignore the crowd and go against the grain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. When Rosa Parks sat on that bus, she chose to make a fuss. She chose to break the rules and take the blame. Her choice to sit and fight helped to bring on civil rights, because one strong woman chose to be a pain. Be a pain, be a pain. Shout about it and complain. If they say you have to move, say I'll remain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Harvey Milk, chose to run for the council board and won, even though folks said you can't because you're gay. One brave LGBTQ elected leader ran and knew you can change things if you choose to be a pain. Be a pain, be a pain. Shout about it and complain. Tell them I won't let you make me feel ashamed. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Tennis star named Billie Jean told the world she had a dream that men and women would be paid the same. She refused to hit that ball till there was equal pay for all. She was a king because she was a royal pain. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. If they refuse to pay, refuse to play the game. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Kids from Parkland led the fight for something they all knew was right. They said it's time for us to finally make a change. If adults can't compromise, we must go march for our lives. They spoke out and led the charge. They all were pains. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. When you're faced with laws you know are just insane. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Oh, be a pain, shout about it and complain. Ignore the crowd and go against the grain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain.
Let us take a breath together as we open our hearts for the sharing of our joys and sorrows. If you have a joy or a sorrow in your heart that you wish to acknowledge, I invite you in a moment to raise your hands and unmute your microphone when Fiona calls you by name. As we enter this time of sharing, I will light a candle of joy, knowing that a joy shared is a joy magnified, and also a candle of sorrow, knowing that a sorrow shared is a sorrow diminished. As I light these candles, let us open our hearts to one another.
All right, does anyone have a
Sharing, I light a final candle, representing all of those joys and all of those sorrows that we hold silently in the sanctuary of our hearts. May the light of these candles and the compassion of this community remind us that wherever we are on our journey, each of us is worthy of love, and each of us is able to love. Let us take a deep breath together, feeling that spirit of life, that spirit of love that connects us one to another. Let us take a deep breath together, perhaps rolling our shoulders back or wiggling our fingers and toes, noticing and releasing some small tension in our body. Let us take a deep breath together, appreciating the gift of this day as we enter a time of shared silence and meditation. Will you lift your hearts and join me in the spirit of prayer, listening in these words for the language of faith most meaningful to you? Eternal presence, known by many names, known in many ways. We gather this morning, screen to screen, heart to heart, in a community that holds us and inspires us and encourages us. We give thanks for the joy of our lives, for the friends, the family, the communities that support us. We open our hearts with sorrow for all of the challenges those in and beyond our community are experiencing. We open our hearts to the hundreds of thousands, the millions in our country who are affected by COVID. We wish comfort for those who are grieving the death of loved ones. We wish health and strength for those who are living with and recovering from COVID. And we wish for a world in which we continue to keep our loving distance physically while continuing to connect to one another in other ways so that we might together create protection, safety, health. Spirit of life, spirit of love, at this turning point in our country's history, let us open our hearts to all the positive possibilities in front of us. Let us remember that in this interdependent world, each of us has worth and dignity. Each of us has a voice. Each of us has the freedom and the responsibility to participate in the democratic communities in our homes, our towns, our country, so that we might together work for that world of freedom, justice, compassion, and peace. We pray this in love's name. Amen, and blessed be. Will you join me in singing Circle Round for Freedom? The words will be on the screen and in the chat.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for its soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Keep the circle whole.
Our reading this morning is by Adrienne Marie Brown from her book, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change and Changing Worlds. She writes, "We are in an imagination battle. Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Renisha McBride, and so many others are dead because in some white imagination, they were dangerous. Imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of ability." She continues, "I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. We have to imagine beyond our fears, imagine and conceive together. We must imagine new worlds that transition ideologies and norms so that no one sees Black people as murderers or brown people as terrorists and aliens. This is a time travel exercise for the heart. All organizing is science fiction. We are bending the future together into something we have never experienced. A world where everyone experiences abundance, access, pleasure, human rights, dignity, freedom, transformative justice, peace. We long for this, and we believe it is possible." Thank you, Adrienne Marie Brown, for those words. In 1829, just a few months after leaving the office of the President of the United States, John Quincy Adams receives a visit from a Quaker anti-slavery advocate named Eliot Cresson. And John Quincy Adams describes this meeting in his diary. And part of what he says is he describes Cresson as having a profound horror of the condition of the slaves in the southern states. There is, I believe, in this respect, some misapprehension and much prejudice. There are no doubt cases of extreme oppression and cruelty, and the impunity for them is complete. But I believe them to be very rare, and that the general treatment of slaves is mild and moderate. Over the next couple of decades, John Quincy Adams returns to DC and goes into Congress, and he becomes the leading anti-slavery voice in Congress. And yet here he is in 1829 saying that he believes that most slavery is mild and moderate. And how these words resonate with us these days. How often have we heard that the problem in one case is so terrible, but in general is mild or moderate? How often do we say or are tempted to say, not all men, not all police officers, not all white people, not me. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm that all people have worth and dignity. Yet sometimes the focus on the individual worth and dignity can distract us from the impact of our collective as well as individual behaviors. The focus on the individual can cloud the realities of institutionalized racism and internalized bias. On January 6th, we saw that the failure of imagination in the violence of white supremacists, even though the plans for storming the Capitol were made public, the public imagination that took form in police forces and qualified leaders, their moral imagination said this couldn't happen, and they weren't prepared. Engaging our moral imagination requires us to imagine, to conceive the full atrocity of what human beings have done, are doing, and could do. To see the violence of slavery, the violence of white supremacy, not as the exception, but as part of the pattern of how our country has been built. And Adrienne Marie Brown, whose words we heard this morning, she tells us that we have to imagine beyond our fears. We use our imagination not to deny how bad things are or escape from the challenges of our society. We use our imagination to see oppression and suffering clearly, even if we have not experienced it ourselves. And then we use imagination to look further at what could be. As Brown tells us, this is a time travel exercise of the heart. Adrienne Marie Brown is a writer, an activist, an artist, a doula, and a multiracial American. She lifts up her own story, her own family story of moral imagination. She writes, "My parents are an interracial couple who fell in love in the Deep South in the mid-70s. Both of them had to be able to see something impossible based on the families and societies they had born into, as not only a possible way forward, but as the best way forward." On this Martin Luther King weekend, we honor the work of the civil rights movement and the commitment of that time to imagine a better way forward. In our chalice lighting this morning, Joan read an excerpt from Martin Luther King's 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail. Some of the heroes in the civil rights movement that he speaks of, each of them are in some way imagining that our society can be organized differently, that there can be integrated colleges and lunch counters and buses. This weekend, we honor their dream and their commitment to bring it into being. So what allowed these heroes of the South that King writes of to take on these transformative actions? Personal courage, for sure, and the support of years of disciplined organizing, moral imagination to see what can be. That moral imagination can bring communities together to then act for what is possible. Adrienne Marie Brown writes, Imagination is one of the spoils of colonization, which in many ways is claiming who gets to imagine the future for a given geography. Losing our imagination is a symptom of trauma. Reclaiming the right to dream the future, strengthening the muscle to imagine together as Black people is a revolutionary decolonizing activity. Who gets to imagine the future? We know that simply articulating a dream or a vision of equality is not enough to bring about transformative change. When we quote Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech from summer 1963, without talking about the peaceful protests in Birmingham and the violent response to them just a few months before, when we focus just on the dream but not the struggle, we dishonor those heroes of the past by not acknowledging the years it took to build community partnerships, the time it takes for nonviolent civil disobedience trainings, the effort it takes to stay grounded in that nonviolent strategy. We don't acknowledge the full force of the violence that the civil rights organizers faced from police and civilians. And when we focus just on the dream, we don't honor all the roles that were needed to protect and support the protesters. Dreaming without working for that dream is not enough. But imagining new possibilities is a tremendously important catalyst for change. It is a way of reclaiming the right to dream the future. And this is part of why we again and again return to that famous speech from 1963 at the March on Washington, where King writes, "Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." He continues, "I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood." The events of January 5th and 6th showed us where our country stands relative to Martin Luther King's dream. For the first time in American history, a Black man was elected to represent the people from the Red Hills of Georgia in the United States Senate. And then the next day, a white supremacist mob stormed the very Capitol building where Senator Warnock would soon be working. It is heartbreaking, heart-opening, all at once. Almost 60 years after the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream." Friends on the journey, we must have the moral imagination to truly see the difficulties of today and tomorrow in order to have any hope of transforming them. We must learn to see the presence of racism in our institutions, our homes, and our hearts. Sometimes that racism is violently explicit, like the mob that stormed the Capitol. And sometimes that racism is dangerously subconscious, like the failure of many leaders and institutions to imagine and therefore prepare for that level of white supremacist violence. So we must look and see the patterns and not assume that everything is mild and moderate with only some exceptions of extreme violence. And we also must have the moral imagination to reclaim the future, to imagine a world of equality, justice, compassion, and joy. When we give voice to our dreams, we help build community and momentum so that we can continue to practice time travel exercises of the heart. And having opened our hearts and our minds to envision a bold and beautiful future, that vision brings us sustenance as we continue the hard, heartbreaking, important, possible work of building the world we dare to dream of. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be. Will you join me in singing hymn 95, There is More Love Somewhere? This hymn comes from the African American tradition. It's performed by musicians from the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. And as we sing, let us sing in honor and appreciation of all those who have worked for love, hope, peace, and joy in the past, in honor of all those that continue that work in the present, and as a commitment for us to continue that striving in the future. Let us sing.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
There is more hope.
There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere.
There is more peace.
There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere.
There is more joy.
There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
As a democratic voluntary association, our church is sustained through the gifts of the members and friends of this congregation. Your generosity makes it possible for us to hold worship services, workshops, and small groups, even in these unusual times. Your generosity helps us strive for justice and live our congregation's values in the wider world. please take this moment to visit our website and consider clicking on the donate button located on the homepage of our website, ufpc.org. Let us open our hearts as these gifts to support the good works of United First Parish Church are joyfully given and gratefully received.
There are many ways to participate in the life of our congregation beyond our Sunday morning services. You can download our announcements from our website, www.ufpc.org. Some of our ongoing programs include that every week our Director of Religious Education, Joan McDonald, creates a children's chapel service for families to watch in their own time. Those can be found on the religious education page of our website. And thank you, Fiona, for pasting some announcement notes in the chat as we go along. There are some special programs this week. Tomorrow, Martin Luther King Day, we are holding a special extra Black Lives Matter standout from 2 to 4 p.m. on the front steps of our church. Thank you to Claire and Mimi for continuing to organize our weekly standouts in conjunction with Quincy for Transformative Change. And I hope that folks will consider joining us tomorrow for this special Monday standout. And of course, the Thursday afternoon standout will continue as well. On Tuesday at 5:30, we will be participating in a national memorial for those who have died from COVID this last year by ringing our church bells in conjunction with congregations around the country and a large COVID memorial in Washington, D.C. You're welcome to come wearing masks and join me to ring our church bell at 5:30 on Tuesday, or hopefully we'll be streaming it on Facebook. I'll be sending an email with more information about that later today. And then next Sunday, January 24th, we are holding our mid-year congregational information meeting. It will begin at approximately 11:45 on Zoom on this same call that we have worship. So we'll, after worship, have some time for catching up in coffee hour, and then we'll come together for this mid-year information meeting. Now let us return to that deep breath, that breath of love, that breath of compassion that is there to ground and guide us. And let us join our hearts for these words of benediction from Reverend William Sinkford. Spirit of life and love, dear God of all nations, there is so much work to do. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Help us hold fast to our vision of what can be, May we see the hope in our history and find the courage and the voice to work for that constant rebirth of freedom and justice. That is our dream. Amen. May we go in peace and go in love to be a blessing to the world. Please join me in singing Carry the Flame as we extinguish our chalices.
Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.
We welcome you to join us for our virtual social hour. We will have the opportunity to go into breakout rooms to discuss the prompt question, what do you envision when you imagine a just and equitable future? We'll also have this main room open for a more organic conversation. So if you prefer not to discuss this prompt, when you're invited to a breakout group, just click on the button that says not now, and you'll stay in this general room. So let's connect with